In Nazi-occupied Europe, where one wrong word means death, Krystyna Skarbek begins another day that could be her last. Known as Christine Granville to her British handlers, she's Poland's most dangerous secret weapon. While other spies rely on gadgets and codes, Krystyna uses something far more powerful, her ability to convince anyone of anything. Today, she must deliver crucial intelligence through a city crawling with Gestapo agents. Every café patron could be an informant. Every glance from a stranger might seal her fate. She carries no weapons except her wit and a smile that has fooled SS officers into believing she's just another harmless refugee. But what happens when even her legendary charm isn't enough to save her from the trap that's been set? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. In Nazi-occupied Europe, where one wrong word means death, Krystyna Skarbek begins another day that could be her last. Known as Christine Granville to her British handlers, she's Poland's most dangerous secret weapon. While other spies rely on gadgets and codes, Krystyna uses something far more powerful, her ability to convince anyone of anything. Today, she must deliver crucial intelligence through a city crawling with Gestapo agents. Every café patron could be an informant. Every glance from a stranger might seal her fate. She carries no weapons except her wit and a smile that has fooled SS officers into believing she's just another harmless refugee. But what happens when even her legendary charm isn't enough to save her from the trap that's been set? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The café on Place Bellecour buzzed with the subdued energy of early morning patrons, their conversations carefully neutral in the way that had become second nature under occupation. Krystyna entered through the side door, scanning the room with practiced casualness. At a corner table sat Francis Kamaerts, her British handler, reading a newspaper and nursing a cup of ersatz coffee that had long since grown cold. He looked up as she approached, his expression showing nothing more than polite recognition. To any observer, they were simply acquaintances, meeting by chance, perhaps a lonely refugee and a kind gentleman offering a moment's conversation. Kamaerts gestured to the empty chair across from him with the subtle economy of movement that marked all successful operatives. "Christine, what a pleasant surprise," he said in careful French, his accent placing him as a businessman from Marseille. "Please join me. The morning is too beautiful to spend alone." She settled into the chair, arranging her worn coat with the unconscious grace that betrayed her aristocratic upbringing to anyone trained to notice such details. "You're too kind, Monsieur Dubois. I was just walking, trying to clear my thoughts." Their conversation proceeded along predetermined lines, innocent words carrying deadly significance. Kamaerts opened his leather portfolio, ostensibly reviewing correspondence, but positioned so she could see the miniature camera nestled among his papers. The device was smaller than anything she had used before, disguised as a lady's compact, but capable of photographing documents with remarkable clarity. "My daughter writes that she is learning photography at school," he said, closing the portfolio with deliberate care. "Children these days, always fascinated by new technology. She tells me the cameras are becoming so small, so precise. Amazing what they can capture now." Krystyna nodded, understanding the implications. The camera's specifications, its capabilities, the technique required for optimal results. Young people adapt so quickly to change. My niece is the same way. She could probably operate equipment that would confuse someone my age. Kamaerts smiled, his eyes crinkling with what appeared to be paternal fondness. Behind that expression, he was calculating distances, timing, contingencies. "The building you mentioned yesterday, the one where you hoped to find seamstress work. I made some inquiries. The administrative offices are on the second floor, but they often need temporary help in the mailroom. Women with neat handwriting, attention to detail." She leaned forward slightly, as if grateful for his assistance. "That is very encouraging. Do you know what hours they prefer their temporary workers?" Mid-morning seems best. After the morning correspondence arrives, but before the lunch period. Perhaps between 10 and 11:30. His fingers drummed a pattern on the table that corresponded to the building's security rotation schedule. My friend who works there mentioned they are particularly busy on Thursdays, processing weekly reports. Thursday today. The transportation schedules would be updated and filed every Thursday morning, then transmitted to regional commands by afternoon. The window of opportunity was narrow, but it existed. Kamayats reached into his jacket and withdrew a small envelope, the kind used for personal correspondence. I nearly forgot. My wife asked me to give you this. She has been thinking of you since our conversation last week, hoping you are finding your way in our difficult times. The envelope contained what appeared to be a letter of introduction, recommending Christine Granville for domestic or clerical work. Hidden within the innocent text were the building's layout, guard positions, and most importantly, the location of the office where the transportation schedules were processed and filed. Your wife is very thoughtful, Krystyna said, folding the letter carefully. I hope I will have good news to share with her soon. They spoke for another few minutes about inconsequential matters before Kamayats glanced at his watch with the air of a man remembering his obligations. I must go. Business calls, as always. But perhaps we will see each other again soon. He gathered his belongings, including the portfolio that had briefly displayed the camera. As he stood, he knocked his napkin to the floor with what seemed like clumsiness. When Krystyna bent to retrieve it, she found the compact camera wrapped within the cloth. Its weight surprisingly substantial for something designed to appear cosmetic. How clumsy of me, Kamayats said with mild embarrassment. Thank you for your help. She handed him the napkin, the camera now concealed in her palm. Think nothing of it. I hope your day goes well. After he left, Krystyna remained at the table for several more minutes, finishing her own coffee and watching the street through the window. The camera felt warm against her skin where she had hidden it. Such a small thing to carry such enormous implications. The photographs it would take today could save Allied lives, disrupt German supply lines, perhaps even shorten this terrible war by days or weeks. She thought about the men who would benefit from the intelligence she gathered. Soldiers whose names she would never know. Families who might see their sons come home because a train carrying ammunition had been delayed or derailed. The mathematics of espionage were always abstract until you held the tools in your hands. Walking through Lyon's narrow streets toward her target, Krystyna's fingers found the rosary hidden beneath her dress, its familiar beads worn smooth by decades of devoted hands. Her mother had pressed it into her palm during their last embrace at the train station in Krakow, when the world still made sense and daughters could kiss their mothers. Goodbye with promises of letters and holiday, visits. The weight of those coral beads against her chest brought back the scent of her mother's lavender perfume, the rustle of silk dresses in the morning drawing room, the sound of piano lessons drifting from the music room where her younger sister practiced scales with determined concentration. Countess Maria Skarbek had possessed the kind of elegance that made other women study her movements, hoping to unlock the secrets of true refinement. Promise me you will never forget who you are, her mother had whispered that final morning. Whatever happens in this world, you carry our family's honor with you. The irony was not lost on Krystyna now. Walking toward a building full of German officers while carrying forged papers and photographing equipment. Her mother had raised her to be a proper Polish countess, educated in French literature and watercolor painting, prepared for a life of charitable works and elegant dinner parties. The invasion had transformed those accomplishments into something far more dangerous. Her childhood at the family estate seemed like stories from another person's life. Summer afternoons reading beneath the ancient oak trees, winter evenings when the whole family gathered around the piano while her father played Chopin. Count Jerzy Skarbek had been a man of gentle disposition, more comfortable with his books and botanical studies than the political conversations that increasingly dominated Warsaw society in the late 1930s. Politics, or for people who have forgotten how to live, he used to say, tending to his greenhouse while refugees began streaming across Poland's borders with tales of what was happening in Germany. We have our land, our family, our traditions. That is enough for any reasonable person. The Germans had taught him otherwise on September 1st, when Stuka screamed over the estate, and artillery shells began falling in the wheat fields where he had planned to experiment with new cultivation techniques. The last letter Krystyna received from home described him standing in the ruins of his greenhouse, holding a broken orchid pot and weeping not for the destroyed. Building but for the plants that would never bloom, her own transformation had begun that autumn in London, when grief and rage had driven her to the offices of the Special Operations Executive. The recruiters had been skeptical at first. Polish nobility were known for their courage, but espionage required a different kind of strength than cavalry charges or dueling pistols. Can you lie convincingly to people who trust you? Colonel Maurice Buckmaster had asked during her final interview. Can you smile at a German officer while planning his death? Can you walk away from friends who might be captured, knowing you cannot help them without compromising the mission? She had answered yes to all his questions, though she had not truly understood what those words would cost until she began living them. The training in Scotland had taught her to pick locks and forge documents, to kill silently and photograph documents without being detected. But no amount of preparation could have readied her for the loneliness of living constantly in character. Never able to drop the mask even when exhaustion made her bones ache, the rosary reminded her that beneath Christine Granville lived Krystyna Skarbek, daughter of Count Jerzy and Countess Maria, raised with the understanding that nobility meant service to something greater than yourself. Her parents had taught her to speak truth, to protect those weaker than herself, to face adversity with dignity intact. Now she used those lessons to serve her country in ways they never could have imagined. The grace her mother had drilled into her made German officers drop their guard. The languages her tutors had insisted upon allowed her to blend into any European city. The composure her father had modeled while reading disturbing newspaper reports kept her calm when Gestapo agents questioned her papers. She thought of her sister Anna, barely 16 when the war began, who had written excited letters about her first formal dance, and the young cavalry officer who had asked permission to court her. Those letters had stopped coming sometime in 1940. Krystyna did not know if Anna was alive, captured, or dead. The uncertainty was perhaps worse than definitive grief would have been. The German administrative building came into view at the end of Rue Mercière, its Nazi flags hanging limp in the still morning air. Krystyna touched the rosary once more, feeling her mother's presence like a benediction before stepping fully into Christine Granville's desperate courage. Some traditions were worth dying for. Some promises were worth keeping, even when the cost might be everything you had left to lose. Her mother had asked her never to forget who she was. Standing before the enemy's stronghold, Krystyna understood that remembering meant more than preserving the past. It meant ensuring there would be a future worth remembering. The Café de la Paix sat directly across from the German administrative building, its outdoor tables offering an unobstructed view of the enemy's daily routines. Krystyna settled at a corner table with her back to the wall, ordering café au lait and a small pastry that would justify her presence for the next hour. In her handbag lay a piece of paper that appeared to be a love letter, its romantic phrases hiding detailed intelligence about German patrol schedules and building security. She withdrew the letter, with the careful attention of a woman reading cherished words from a distant sweetheart. To any observer, she was simply another refugee clinging to memories of better times. The reality was far more dangerous. Hidden within declarations of eternal devotion were precise notations about guard changes, shift rotations, and the brief windows when building entrances remained minimally supervised. "My dearest Christine," the letter began in flowery script that masked its lethal purpose. "I count the hours until we can walk together again in the gardens we both remember. The roses bloom at precisely 10:30 each morning, their beauty lasting exactly 20 minutes before the gardener tends to other duties. The main gate opens widest when the morning deliveries arrive, though the side entrance remains my favorite for quiet conversations. Across the street, she watched German officers arriving for their daily duties. A Mercedes staff car deposited two senior officials at the main entrance, their uniforms crisp despite the early hour. Wehrmacht soldiers snapped to attention, their movements practiced and precise. The choreography of occupation played out with mechanical regularity that both impressed and disgusted her. An elderly man at the adjacent table caught her attention, his newspaper held at an angle that allowed him to observe the same building. He wore the clothes of a retired clerk, unremarkable except for the way his eyes tracked movement with professional interest. When he caught her glance, he smiled with grandfatherly warmth that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Beautiful morning, Mademoiselle," he said in accent-free French that somehow suggested education beyond his apparent station. Though these days, one appreciates simple pleasures more than ever. She returned his smile with appropriate shyness. "Indeed, monsieur. I was just reading a letter from my fiancé. He writes such lovely descriptions of his work in the countryside. Young love," the man chuckled, folding his newspaper to reveal the crossword puzzle partially completed. "My own grandson is about that age. Also working in the countryside, as it happens. Agricultural consulting, very specialized work. The exchange could have been completely innocent, but Krystyna recognized the careful dance of recognition between resistance operatives. Agricultural consulting was code for sabotage operations against German supply lines. This man was offering to coordinate her mission with broader resistance activities. She consulted her letter again, pointing to a particular passage as if sharing a romantic sentiment. He mentions that the morning train from Marseille brings fresh flowers to the market at 11:15. Such attention to detail in his observations. The old man's eyes sharpened almost imperceptibly. 11:15 was when the German building's administrative staff took their coffee break, leaving minimal personnel in the document processing office. Her intelligence was current and accurate. "Your young man sounds very observant," he replied, penciling numbers into his crossword that corresponded to building entrance codes she would need. "Perhaps he would enjoy meeting my grandson sometime. They seem to share similar interests." A commotion across the street interrupted their careful conversation. A black Citroën, bearing Gestapo markings, had pulled up to the building's side entrance. Two men in civilian clothes emerged, their bearing unmistakably that of security police. They moved with the confident swagger of predators in familiar territory. Acknowledging the Wehrmacht guards with casual authority, Krystyna felt her stomach tighten as one of the Gestapo agents paused to study the café's outdoor seating area. His gaze swept across the tables with professional suspicion, lingering on faces, noting details, filing information for future reference. When his eyes met hers, she lowered them with the modest embarrassment of a young woman caught staring. The agent spoke briefly to his companion, pointing in her direction. Her hands remained steady as she folded the love letter, but her mind raced through contingency plans. Had someone identified her? Was this random security theater, or had her cover been compromised? The old man sensed her tension without looking directly at the Gestapo car. "My grandson always says the morning is best for outdoor activities," he murmured, his words carrying subtle warning. "Before the afternoon heat makes everything uncomfortable." The message was clear. Complete the mission quickly before increased security made infiltration impossible. The window of opportunity was narrowing with each passing moment. Krystyna finished her coffee with deliberate calm, leaving coins on the table that would cover her bill, plus a tip appropriate for Christine Granville's modest circumstances. As she gathered her belongings, she caught the old man's eye one final time. "Please give your grandson my regards," she said softly. "I hope his work goes well today." The German administrative building loomed before Krystyna like a fortress of bureaucratic menace. Its stone facade decorated with Nazi eagles and swastika flags that snapped in the morning breeze. She approached the main entrance with the hesitant steps of a desperate refugee, clutching her worn handbag and the letter of introduction that Francis Kamayatz had provided. Hidden within the lining of her coat, wrapped in silk to prevent accidental discovery, lay the poison pill that would ensure she never faced Gestapo interrogation alive. The cyanide capsule was smaller than her thumbnail, disguised as a decorative pearl on an antique brooch that had belonged to her grandmother. She had practiced reaching for it during training exercises in Scotland, timing how quickly she could bite through the thin shell if capture became inevitable. The instructors had been clinical in their explanations. 12 seconds from ingestion to unconsciousness. Death within 2 minutes. No pain, they promised, though Krystyna wondered how anyone could verify such claims. 2 Wehrmacht sentries flanked the entrance, their rifles held at attention, but their eyes alert for any sign of suspicious behavior. The younger guard appeared nervous, frequently adjusting his helmet and scanning the street as if expecting attack from every shadow. His partner was older, more seasoned, with the weary expression of a soldier who had learned to conserve energy for moments that actually mattered. Krystyna approached them with the careful deference that occupied territories demanded from their residents. Her posture suggested submission without complete defeat, the bearing of someone who retained dignity despite circumstances. She had studied this performance in mirrors and practiced it with other SOE operatives until it became second nature. "Excuse me. Gentlemen," she said in French heavily accented with Eastern European inflections. "I was told there might be work here for someone with secretarial skills. I have references." The older guard looked her up and down with professional disinterest. Her appearance had been calculated to inspire neither desire nor suspicion. Plain enough to avoid unwanted attention, but sufficiently neat to suggest competence. The dress was well made, but obviously old. The kind of clothing a middle-class woman might wear when forced to seek employment for the first time. "Papers," he said in heavily accented French, extending his hand with the automatic gesture of authority. She produced Christine Granville's identity documents with appropriate nervousness, allowing her hands to tremble slightly as she passed them over. The trembling was genuine. No amount of training could completely eliminate the fear that came with submitting forged papers to enemy inspection. The documents were excellent forgeries, but excellent was not the same as perfect. The guard studied the papers with practiced thoroughness, comparing the photograph to her face, checking the official stamps and signatures that testified to Christine Granville's tragic but unremarkable history. His eyes lingered on her listed place of birth, and she prepared herself to recite the cover story she had memorized about her fictional childhood in Warsaw. "Warsaw," he said. "Not quite a question. Bad business there." "You were lucky to get out," she nodded with appropriate gravity, allowing genuine emotion to color her response. "I lost everything. My husband, our home, my family. I've been walking for months, looking for somewhere to start again." The guard's expression softened slightly. Perhaps he had family of his own, or perhaps he simply retained enough humanity to recognize authentic suffering when he encountered it. He handed back her papers with something approaching sympathy. "Herr Oberst manages civilian personnel," he said, jerking his thumb toward the building's interior. "Second floor, office 204, but I would not get your hopes too high. They are very particular about who they hire." She thanked him with the gratitude appropriate to someone grasping at any opportunity, no matter how slim. The younger guard held the door open for her, his courtesy automatic, despite the uniform he wore. Some habits of civilization persisted, even in the machinery of occupation. The building's interior was a monument to German efficiency. Marble floors polished to mirror brilliance, walls lined with portraits of Nazi leadership, bronze plaques commemorating various military victories. Her footsteps echoed in the vast lobby as she approached the reception desk where a middle-aged German woman sat typing with mechanical precision. The receptionist looked up with the expression of someone whose patience had been worn thin by constant interruptions. Her uniform was immaculate, her hair arranged in the severe style favored by Nazi officialdom. Behind wire-rimmed spectacles, her eyes held the calculating intelligence of a career bureaucrat who had survived by making herself indispensable to whoever held power. "What do you want?" she asked in French that carried unmistakable authority despite her accent. Krystyna repeated her request for employment, producing the letter of introduction with hands that shook convincingly. The woman scanned the document with professional skepticism, her expression suggesting that she had seen countless similar appeals from desperate refugees seeking any form of survival. "Wait here," the woman said finally, rising from her desk with the measured movements of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Herr Oberst will decide if you are worth his time." Left alone in the lobby, Krystyna felt the weight of the poison pill against her breast like a cold reminder of how quickly this performance could become her final act. The woman who returned to escort Krystyna upstairs was not the stern receptionist, but a younger German secretary whose uniform seemed too large for her slight frame. Her name tag read Fräulein Weber, and behind her wire-rimmed glasses, her eyes held the weary sadness of someone far from home. As they climbed the marble staircase, Krystyna noticed how the girl's hand trembled slightly on the banister, and how she kept glancing nervously at the uniformed guards who watched their progress. "Herr Oberst is very busy today," Fräulein Weber said in French that carried the careful precision of someone speaking a learned language. "He can spare only a few minutes for your interview. Please answer his questions quickly and directly." The girl's nervousness was palpable, and Krystyna recognized an opportunity. Frightened people often sought comfort in unexpected places, and loneliness could make even the most dedicated enemy sympathetic to a fellow outsider's plight. As they walked down the corridor, lined with Nazi propaganda posters, she allowed her own anxiety to show through Christine Granville's desperate facade. "I understand completely," Krystyna replied, her voice carrying just the right mixture of gratitude and apprehension. "I know how important everyone's time is here. I just pray there might be some small position where I could be useful." Something in her tone seemed to resonate with the young secretary. Fräulein Weber paused outside the Oberst's office, studying Krystyna's face with an expression that suggested recognition of shared vulnerability. "You have come very far to be here," she said, and it was not quite a question. "From Warsaw," Krystyna confirmed, allowing her voice to catch slightly on the city's name. "Everything I knew is gone now. I've been walking for so long, sleeping in churches when the priests permit it, taking whatever work I can find." The girl's eyes softened with unmistakable sympathy. "I am from Hamburg," she said quietly. "Sometimes I feel as if I am walking too, even when I am standing still. This place, this work, it is not what I thought my life would become." Krystyna reached into her handbag and withdrew a small brass button that she had carefully removed from a Wehrmacht uniform during a previous operation. She had kept it as a trophy, but now it would serve a different purpose. "I found this on the road near Dijon," she said, offering it to the secretary. "A soldier must have lost it. Perhaps it belongs to someone you know." Fräulein Weber accepted the button with surprise, turning it over in her palm. The gesture was innocuous enough to avoid suspicion, but it established a connection between them, a small shared secret that made Krystyna seem less like a threatening stranger and more like someone who understood the complexities of wartime existence. "Thank you," the girl said, tucking the button into a uniform pocket. "That was very thoughtful. Most people would have kept such a thing or sold it. I am not most people," Krystyna replied, with a smile that conveyed both strength and vulnerability. "My mother taught me that kindness costs nothing, even when we have nothing else to give." The secretary's expression brightened noticeably, as if she had discovered an unexpected ally in this building full of stern faces and barked orders. When she knocked on the Oberst's door and announced the visitor, her voice carried a subtle note of recommendation that had not been there moments before. "Herr Oberst, the applicant is here. She seems very capable, and her references appear to be in order." During the brief interview that followed, Krystyna found herself studying the office layout with peripheral vision while answering questions about her secretarial experience and familiarity with German administrative procedures. The Oberst was a tired-looking man in his 50s who seemed more interested in returning to his paperwork than in conducting thorough personnel interviews. He asked perfunctory questions about her typing speed and language skills, barely glancing at her forged documents. "We occasionally need temporary assistance with filing and correspondence," he said finally. "Fräulein Weber can show you where such work is done if you prove satisfactory. The pay is minimal, but it includes a midday meal." When they left his office, Fräulein Weber seemed genuinely pleased by the outcome. "He liked you," she said with the enthusiasm of someone starved for positive interactions. "Usually he dismisses applicants within minutes. You must have made a good impression." As they walked through the building's corridors, the secretary pointed out various offices and departments with the pride of someone eager to share her specialized knowledge. Most importantly, she indicated the document processing center where transportation schedules were handled, describing it as very busy on Thursdays, with the kind of detail that an experienced secretary would naturally possess. "The filing systems are quite complex," she explained as they passed the secured office where Krystyna's target documents waited. "Only senior staff are permitted access, but sometimes we need temporary help with basic organization tasks." Krystyna listened with the grateful attention of someone genuinely seeking employment, all while memorizing security procedures, guard positions, and the subtle rhythms of bureaucratic routine that might provide the opening she needed. The document processing center occupied a corner office on the second floor, its windows facing north to provide steady light for clerical work. Fräulein Weber had provided Krystyna with a stack of routine correspondence to file, along with access to the filing cabinets where Wehrmacht transportation schedules were maintained in meticulous German order. The room smelled of carbon paper and ink, the mundane sense of bureaucracy that masked the deadly significance of the information contained within these walls. Krystyna worked methodically through her assigned filing, maintaining the careful efficiency that Christine Granville would display, while her trained eyes catalogued the office's contents. The transportation schedules were kept in a locked cabinet marked streng geheim, top secret, but she had observed Fräulein Weber retrieving documents from it earlier, using a key she kept on a chain around her neck. The schedules themselves were organized by date and region, thick folders containing detailed listings of troop movements, supply convoys, and ammunition transports throughout southern France. The information was precisely what British intelligence needed to coordinate sabotage operations against German supply lines. Each page represented potential Allied victories, German defeats, and lives that might be saved through strategic disruption. At precisely 11:15, as predicted by the old man's intelligence, the office staff departed for their morning coffee break. The routine was as reliable as clockwork. Fräulein Weber gathered her colleagues with the announcement that fresh pastries had arrived in the staff lounge. And within minutes, Krystyna found herself alone with the most sensitive military documents in Laon. She moved quickly but carefully, producing the miniature camera from her handbag and adjusting its settings for the available light. The device was remarkably sophisticated, disguised as a lady's compact, but capable of producing sharp photographs of documents under various lighting conditions. Her training in Scotland had included extensive practice with such equipment, but the reality of using it in enemy territory carried tensions that no exercise could replicate. The first documents she photographed detailed ammunition convoys scheduled to move through the Rhone Valley during the following week. Each page contained train numbers, departure times, routes, and cargo specifications that would allow Allied forces to target the most strategically valuable shipments. She worked with the mechanical precision of a professional, ensuring proper focus and exposure while listening, constantly for footsteps. In the corridor outside, the second folder contained troop movement schedules for Wehrmacht units being transferred from France to Italy, where German forces were struggling to contain Allied advances following the successful landings at Anzio. The schedules showed exactly when these reinforcements would be most vulnerable during their journey, traveling through mountain passes where partisan forces could strike with maximum effectiveness. As she photographed page after page of critical intelligence, Krystyna's mind processed the human cost represented by these sterile administrative documents. Each convoy listed contained weapons that would kill Allied soldiers. Each troop movement represented German attempts to strengthen defenses against liberation forces. The photographs she was taking might prevent hundreds of deaths or allow breakthrough operations that could end the war months sooner. The camera's mechanism was nearly silent, but each click of the shutter seemed impossibly loud in the quiet office. She had photographed 12 pages when she heard voices approaching in the corridor outside. Male voices speaking German with the crisp authority of senior officers conducting business. They were not supposed to return from their break for another 10 minutes. Krystyna closed the filing cabinet and returned the camera to her handbag with movements that betrayed none of her racing pulse. She resumed her assigned filing work, arranging papers with the methodical attention of a conscientious temporary employee. When the door opened, she looked up with mild curiosity, appropriate to someone interrupted in routine clerical duties. 2 Wehrmacht officers entered, engaged in animated discussion about supply difficulties in the Italian campaign. The senior officer, wearing the insignia of a major, paused when he noticed her presence. His eyes took in her civilian clothes, her modest appearance, the stack of routine correspondence she was processing. "Who is this?" he asked Fräulein Weber, who had followed the officers into the room with obvious nervousness. "Christine Granville, Herr Major," the secretary replied quickly. Herr Oberst assigned her to assist with the filing backlog. "She has excellent references and speaks several languages." The major studied Krystyna with professional interest, noting details with the trained observation of an intelligence officer. She met his gaze with appropriate deference, allowing a slight smile to suggest the modest pride of someone grateful for honest employment. "You are not German," he observed, his French heavily accented but precise. "No, Herr Major, I am Polish from Warsaw. I fled when the city fell and have been seeking work ever since." He nodded with the satisfaction of someone whose assumptions had been confirmed. "Polish women make excellent secretaries. Very precise, very thorough. Continue with your work." The officers proceeded to their business, retrieving documents from various cabinets while discussing logistical challenges. Krystyna continued filing with apparent concentration, though every sense remained alert for opportunities or dangers. The transportation schedule she had photographed represented information that could change the course of battles, but only if she could escape the building without discovery. The colonel arrived without warning, his polished boots clicking against the marble floor with the measured cadence of absolute authority. Krystyna sensed his presence before she saw him, the way small animals sense approaching predators through instincts older than thought. When she looked up from her filing, she found herself meeting the cold grey eyes of a man who had built his career on detecting deception. Oberst Heinrich Brenner wore his uniform like armor, every button and insignia positioned with mathematical precision. His silver cigarette case caught the afternoon light as he withdrew it from his breast pocket, the engraved eagle and swastika gleaming against polished metal. The case had been a gift from Heinrich Himmler himself, presented after Brenner's successful interrogation of a British spy ring in Brussels. He handled it now with the casual confidence of someone accustomed to making other people nervous. "Fräulein Weber," he said without taking his eyes off Krystyna, "please introduce me to our new assistant." The secretary's voice carried a tremor that had not been there moments before. "Herr Oberst, this is Christine Granville, the Polish woman you approved for temporary filing work." Brenner approached Krystyna's desk with deliberate slowness, his gaze cataloguing every detail of her appearance, her posture, the precise arrangement of papers before her. She met his scrutiny with the appropriate mixture of respect and nervousness. allowing her hands to still their filing motion while maintaining eye contact for exactly the right duration before lowering her gaze in deference. "Polish," he said, tasting the word as if evaluating wine. "From Warsaw, according to your papers. Tell me, Fräulein Granville, what did you do before the war?" The question carried layers of implication that Krystyna recognized immediately. He was not making conversation. This was an interrogation disguised as casual inquiry, each question designed to reveal inconsistencies in her cover story. She responded with the careful honesty that made the best lies believable. "I was married to a teacher, Herr Oberst. We lived quietly, nothing important. He taught mathematics at a gymnasium near our neighborhood. I helped with his papers sometimes, correcting examinations, organizing his files." "Mathematics," Brenner repeated, opening his cigarette case with a soft click that seemed unnaturally loud in the silent office. "A precise subject. No room for approximation or creative interpretation. Either the answer is correct or it is not." He selected a cigarette with theatrical care, his movements designed to create tension through extended silence. The tobacco was expensive, Turkish blend that spoke of privilege and connections within the Nazi hierarchy. When he lit it with a gold lighter bearing SS insignia, the flame illuminated his face with shadows that emphasized the calculating intelligence behind his expression. "I find that people who work with mathematics develop certain habits of mind," he continued, exhaling smoke with practiced elegance. "They notice patterns, inconsistencies, things that do not quite fit together properly. Would you agree, Fräulein Granville?" Krystyna nodded with the earnest attention of someone grateful for philosophical discussion with an educated superior. "My husband always said that numbers never lie, Herr Oberst. Unlike people, they cannot pretend to be something they are not." The colonel's smile was thin and predatory. "Precisely my point. Numbers reveal truth, even when people prefer to conceal it. For example, your papers indicate that you fled Warsaw in October 1939, yet the clothing you wear, while modest, shows signs of recent tailoring. The stitching is too fresh for garments that have been worn continuously for 4 years of desperate travel." Her pulse accelerated, but her expression remained appropriately confused rather than alarmed. "I do not understand, Herr Oberst. These clothes were given to me by the Catholic charity in Dijon. The sisters there take in donations and alter them for refugees. Perhaps that explains what you noticed." Brenner circled her desk like a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. Catholic charity. How convenient. And this charity, did they also provide you with new undergarments? Because the elastic in your slip is quite new, judging by how it sits beneath your dress. Most unusual for someone who has been destitute for 4 years. The observation was accurate and damning, a detail that could unravel her entire cover story if she could not provide convincing explanation. Krystyna felt the weight of the cigarette case in her peripheral vision, its silver surface reflecting light like a weapon waiting to strike. She forced herself to blush with the embarrassment appropriate to such personal inquiry. "The sisters were very kind," she said quietly. "They said that a woman must maintain her dignity, even in difficult circumstances. They provided essentials that I had been forced to do without. I was grateful for their Christian charity." The colonel's eyes narrowed as he weighed her response against his suspicions. His cigarette burned steadily between his fingers, forgotten in his concentration on this verbal chess game where a single wrong move could mean death. The silver case lay closed on the desk beside him, its engraved surface catching reflections of the afternoon sun, streaming through the office windows. The cleaning woman entered the office with the invisibility that comes from being overlooked by those who consider themselves important. Her grey hair was pulled back beneath a worn headscarf, and her hands bore the calluses of decades spent scrubbing floors and emptying wastepaper baskets. To Colonel Brenner, she was merely part of the building's furniture, worthy of no more attention than the filing cabinets or desk lamps that filled the administrative spaces. But Krystyna noticed the way the woman's eyes met hers, for just a fraction of a second longer than necessary, and how her movements around the room carried a subtle purposefulness that spoke of more than routine cleaning duties. Most importantly, she observed the small tricolour cockade pinned inside the woman's coat lapel, barely visible unless one knew where to look. The red, white and blue fabric was faded with age, but its significance was unmistakable to anyone familiar with resistance symbols. Madame Dubois cleans this floor every afternoon. Fräulein Weber explained to Colonel Brenner when he glanced with mild irritation at the interruption. She has worked here since before the war. Very reliable, very thorough. The colonel dismissed the cleaning woman from his attention with the casual indifference of someone accustomed to servants. His focus remained fixed on Krystyna, his interrogation continuing with the relentless pressure of water wearing away stone. But Madame Dubois worked methodically closer to Krystyna's desk, her mop bucket and cleaning supplies providing cover for movements that brought her within whispering distance. "Catholic charity is indeed a blessing," and the old woman murmured as she wiped down the window ledge behind Krystyna's chair. Her voice was barely audible, but her words carried coded meaning that made Krystyna's pulse quicken with recognition. The sisters at Saint-Nizier are particularly generous to travelers in need. They maintain a guest house behind the cathedral, very discreet, very welcoming to those seeking shelter. Saint-Nizier Cathedral was less than 10 minutes' walk from the German building, and guest houses behind churches had served as escape routes for resistance operatives throughout occupied Europe. Madame Dubois was offering sanctuary, but more than that, she was providing an alternative exit strategy that had not been part of Krystyna's original plan. Colonel Brenner continued his psychological assault, his questions becoming increasingly specific and potentially devastating. "Your husband's school in Warsaw, what was its name? I have contacts there who might remember a mathematics teacher named Granville." The trap was closing with methodical precision. No matter how carefully constructed, cover stories could not account for every possible verification. If Brenner had connections in Warsaw, which seemed entirely possible given his rank and responsibilities, he could expose her fictional background within hours. She needed to end this encounter before his suspicions crystallized into action. "École Sainte-Marie," she replied, naming a school that had been destroyed in the 1939 bombardment. Its records lost forever. But it was bombed during the siege. Nothing remains now except rubble and memories. Madame Dubois had moved to cleaning the desk adjacent to Krystyna's, her clothwork bringing her close enough to observe the colonel's cigarette case lying forgotten beside his elbow. With movements too quick to be detected by someone focused elsewhere, she palmed a small cloth armband bearing the Cross of Lorraine, pressing it into Krystyna's hand as she appeared to dust the desktop. The armband was more than symbolic. Its presence indicated that French resistance networks were actively monitoring the German building, probably had been for months. They knew about her mission, had been waiting for an opportunity to assist, and were now offering extraction routes that SOE planners in London could never have anticipated. "Madame Dubois knows every corner of this building," Fräulein Weber added innocently, unaware of the deadly game being played around her. "She even has keys to areas that most of us cannot access. The basement storage rooms, the old tunnel system that connects to the cathedral heating pipes. Tunnel system." Krystyna's training had included basic architectural intelligence about buildings constructed during the medieval period, when underground passages often connected religious and secular structures for defensive purposes. If such tunnels still existed and remained unknown to German security, they could provide an escape route that bypassed all conventional surveillance. Colonel Brenner stubbed out his cigarette with sharp, decisive movements that suggested his patience was approaching its limits. "Enough pleasant conversation. Fräulein Granville, I want you to accompany me to my office. There are additional questions that require more private discussion." The invitation was a command disguised as courtesy, and both women understood its implications. Private interrogation rooms were where resistors disappeared forever, where careful questioning became enhanced interrogation, where the civilized facade of occupation revealed its true nature. Madame Dubois gathered her cleaning supplies with deliberate slowness, her movements designed to buy precious seconds while Krystyna calculated options. The resistance armband felt warm against her palm, a tangible reminder that she was not alone in this building full of enemies. Somewhere in Lyon's underground networks, people were waiting to help her escape. If she could survive long enough to reach them. The alarm began as a low wail that seemed to emanate from the building's very bones, rising in pitch and intensity until it filled every corridor, every office, every corner where secrets might hide. Krystyna felt the sound in her chest like a physical blow, recognizing it immediately as the signal that her worst fears had materialized. Somewhere in this fortress of German bureaucracy, someone had discovered that classified documents had been compromised. Colonel Brenner's head snapped up at the first note of the siren, his interrogation forgotten as decades of military training took precedence over personal curiosity. He moved to the window with swift efficiency, his grey eyes scanning the street below for signs of external threat before recognizing that the alarm pattern indicated internal security breach rather than air raid or partisan attack. The Gestapo identification badge on his uniform caught the light as he turned, its silver eagle and lightning bolts gleaming with malevolent authority. The badge represented power over life and death, the bureaucratic machinery that could transform suspicion into arrest warrant with a single signature. Krystyna had seen similar badges in Scotland during training exercises, but encountering the genuine article while trapped in enemy territory carried implications that no simulation could replicate. Lockdown protocol? Brenner announced to the room with the calm authority of someone accustomed to crisis management. No one enters or leaves this building until security determines the nature of the breach. Fräulein Weber, secure all classified materials immediately. The secretary moved with nervous efficiency, locking filing cabinets and desk drawers while casting worried glances at Krystyna. Her earlier sympathy had transformed into suspicious concern, as if she were beginning to recognize that the harmless Polish refugee might not be exactly what she appeared. The change in atmosphere was palpable, friendship cooling into professional wariness under the pressure of military emergency. Through the office windows, Krystyna could see Wehrmacht soldiers taking positions around the building's perimeter. Additional vehicles were arriving, disgorging security personnel who moved with the purposeful urgency of predators following a fresh scent. The net was closing with mechanical precision, each element of German security apparatus sliding into predetermined positions like pieces of a deadly puzzle. All personnel will remain in their current locations pending individual security interviews, Brenner continued, his voice carrying the absolute authority of martial law. Anyone attempting to leave the building will be considered a security threat and dealt with accordingly. The implications were clear enough without elaboration. German efficiency extended to execution as readily as administration. Krystyna's mind raced through contingency plans that suddenly seemed inadequate against the reality of systematic search procedures. Her SOE training had covered escape and evasion scenarios, but theory proved cold comfort when facing the lived experience of being trapped in a building full of armed enemies. Madame Dubois continued her cleaning duties with remarkable composure, her movements betraying none of the tension that filled the room like invisible smoke. She worked methodically around the office, emptying wastebaskets and dusting surfaces while German security protocols unfolded around her. Her apparent invisibility to the military personnel provided a stark reminder that resistance operations often succeeded through the overlooked courage of ordinary people. The cleaning woman's bucket contained more than soap and water. Krystyna caught a glimpse of what appeared to be building blueprints wrapped in waterproof material, detailed floor plans that showed passageways and utility tunnels not marked on official architectural drawings. The documents represented decades of careful observation by maintenance staff who understood the building's hidden geography better than its official occupants. Heavy footsteps echoed in the corridor outside as security teams began their systematic search. Multiple voices spoke in rapid German, coordinating room-by-room examination procedures that would inevitably reach every corner of the building. The sound of doors being opened and closed with military efficiency created a rhythm of approaching discovery that made Krystyna's pulse race. Despite her training in stress management, they will search every office, every closet, every space large enough to conceal a person or stolen documents, Brenner explained, with the satisfaction of someone describing a well-oiled machine. German thoroughness leaves nothing to chance. If there is a spy in this building, we will find them. His badge reflected the overhead lighting as he adjusted his uniform. Each movement reinforcing his role as judge and executioner rolled into one efficient package. The eagle's wings seemed to spread wider in the shifting light, its talons more prominent, its expression more predatory. This was the face of occupation, the bureaucratic machinery that transformed human beings into filing categories and resistance into administrative problems to be solved through systematic application of force. Fräulein Weber had finished securing the classified materials and now stood beside her desk with hands clasped before her, awaiting further instructions with the patient resignation of someone accustomed to following orders, regardless of personal preference. Her earlier warmth toward Krystyna had vanished completely, replaced by the professional distance necessary for survival in an organization where sympathy could be interpreted as treason. The search teams were getting closer, their voices growing louder as they processed each office with methodical efficiency. Behind the oak paneling of the second-floor corridor lay a secret that predated German occupation by 3 centuries. The false wall panel that Madame Dubois had whispered about during her cleaning routine was invisible to casual observation, its edges concealed by decorative molding that matched the building's original 18th century construction. Only someone who had spent years maintaining these corridors would know that a section of seemingly solid wall could swing inward on hidden hinges, revealing a narrow passage designed for servants' movement in an era when wealthy families preferred their help to remain unseen. Krystyna pressed herself against the ancient wood, feeling splinters catch at her dress as she forced her body into the cramped space behind the panel. The passage was barely wide enough for one person, designed for kitchen maids carrying tea trays rather than desperate spies fleeing interrogation. Dust filled her nostrils with the musty scent of centuries, and somewhere in the darkness ahead she could hear the scurrying of rats disturbed by her intrusion into their domain. The sounds of the security search penetrated the walls with terrifying clarity. German voices barked orders in the corridor, mere inches from where she crouched, their boot heels clicking against marble floors as search teams moved methodically from room to room. She could hear furniture being displaced, desk drawers yanked open, filing cabinets searched with the thorough efficiency that characterized every aspect of German military procedure. Check behind every piece of furniture. Colonel Brenner's voice commanded with cold precision. Look for loose floorboards, hidden compartments, anything that might conceal documents or provide hiding space for an infiltrator. The spy is still in this building. His certainty chilled her more than the ancient drafts that whispered through gaps in the old walls. Somehow he knew she had not escaped, which meant the building's perimeter security was complete. Even if she could reach an external wall, Wehrmacht soldiers would be positioned to intercept anyone attempting to flee. The trap was absolute, its jaws closing with methodical inevitability. Through cracks in the paneling, she glimpsed fragments of the search as it passed her hiding place. Uniformed figures moved with practiced coordination, their flashlight beams probing every shadow where a person might conceivably hide. One soldier paused directly in front of the false panel, so close that she could see the individual threads in his grey uniform. His breathing was audible through the thin wood barrier that separated discovery from continued concealment. the soldier's hand traced along the wall molding, his fingers following the decorative carved pattern that disguised the panel's edges. For a moment that stretched like eternity, his exploration focused on the exact area where the hidden entrance was located. Krystyna held her breath until her lungs burned, afraid that even the sound of her heartbeat might betray her presence to someone trained to detect the slightest anomaly. But German thoroughness was matched by German expectation. The soldier was searching for obvious hiding places, not architectural secrets that predated Nazi occupation by generations. His hand moved past the concealed hinges without recognition, continuing along the wall to probe more conventional possibilities. The irony was not lost on her that Germanic obsession with modern efficiency had blinded them to older forms of concealment. The passage behind the wall extended further into the building's interior than she had dared hope. Following its dusty length with cautious steps, she discovered that it connected to a network of servant corridors that honeycombed the structure like arteries in a living body. The building's original architects had designed these hidden ways to allow domestic staff to move throughout the mansion without disturbing the family's activities or guests' privacy. Each intersection presented choices that could mean salvation or discovery. Passages branched toward the kitchen level, the main staircase, and what appeared to be external access points that might once have allowed servants to receive deliveries without using the formal entrances. The darkness was complete, forcing her to navigate by touch while listening constantly for sounds that might indicate whether her route was taking her towards safety or deeper into danger. Behind her, the search continued with relentless thoroughness. She could hear doors being forced open, furniture overturned, and the occasional crash of breaking glass as investigators examined every possible hiding place. Colonel Brenner's voice continued to coordinate the effort, his tone growing more frustrated as each empty room failed to produce the spy he knew remained within the building's walls. The passage floor creaked beneath her feet, despite her attempts to move silently. The ancient wood complained with every step, each sound seeming impossibly loud in the confined space. Somewhere ahead, she could detect a different quality of air movement that suggested connection to larger spaces, possibly the building's lower levels, where Madame Dubois had mentioned tunnel access to the cathedral. But the hidden panel that had provided temporary salvation was also a trap. The passage had only one entrance, which meant that if the Germans discovered her hiding place, there would be no escape route except forward into unknown territory. She was committed now to following this ancient path wherever it might lead, trusting in architectural secrets older than the Reich to carry her beyond the reach of modern hatred. The hidden passage deposited Krystyna in the cathedral's ancient crypt. Through a stone archway that had been sealed for decades, its mortar cracked by centuries of settling foundation, she emerged into the cool darkness beneath Saint-Nizier like a soul ascending from purgatory, her dress torn and dusty from the desperate crawl through forgotten corridors. Above her head, the weight of Gothic architecture pressed down with the accumulated prayers of 1,000 years, offering sanctuary to anyone brave enough to claim it. Father Marcel Dubois was waiting for her in the dim candlelight, his cassock blending with shadows cast by stone pillars carved when Louis XIV ruled France. His face bore the weathered lines of a man who had heard too many confessions, seen too much human suffering, and learned to find grace in the most desperate circumstances. In his gnarled hands he held a dark green bottle, whose label identified it as communion wine, but the liquid within served purposes far removed from religious ceremony. "Welcome, my child," he said in French that carried the authority of absolute sanctuary. "Madame Dubois told me to expect a visitor seeking shelter from the storm. Please sit. You look as though you have traveled a difficult road." The old priest's eyes held no judgment, only the patient compassion of someone who had spent decades ministering to refugees, resistance fighters, and others, fleeing the machinery of occupation. His church had become an unofficial station on the Underground Railroad that moved Allied agents and escaped prisoners across occupied Europe. Though he would never admit such activities to anyone wearing a German uniform, Krystyna sank onto a stone bench worn smooth by countless penitents, her legs trembling with exhaustion and delayed shock. The photographs hidden in her clothing represented intelligence that could alter the course of the war, but only if she could survive long enough to deliver them to British handlers. The cathedral offered temporary refuge, but German efficiency would eventually extend their search to include religious buildings. "They are looking for me," she said simply, knowing that elaborate explanations would be unnecessary with a man who had clearly sheltered others in similar circumstances. "I fear I have brought danger to your doorstep, Father." The priest smiled with gentle irony as he poured wine into a simple glass cup. "Danger arrived in Lyon long before you did, child. The question is not whether we face peril, but how we respond to it. Will you drink with me? The wine is quite good, a gift from parishioners who remember better times." She accepted the cup gratefully, tasting wine that had indeed come from better vineyards than most people could afford during wartime rationing. The communion bottle contained more than sacramental vintage. Hidden within its dark glass were coded messages passed between resistance cells, maps of safe houses, and contact information for escape networks that operated throughout southern France. "The Germans will search every building in this district," she warned, setting down the cup with hands that had finally stopped shaking. "They know someone infiltrated their headquarters. They will not give up easily." Father Dubois nodded with the calm acceptance of someone who had faced such searches before. "They have visited us many times, these earnest young men in their grey uniforms. They are always very respectful, very thorough. They examine our altar, our confessionals, our choir loft. They never think to look in the wine cellar, where we store bottles donated by grateful parishioners." The implications were clear without elaboration. The cathedral's wine cellar had been modified to accommodate human cargo as well as sacramental supplies. Beneath Lyon's most prominent church lay a network of hiding places that had sheltered Allied agents, escaped prisoners, and Jewish families fleeing deportation. The irony was exquisite. German respect for religious authority had blinded them to the sanctuary's true purpose. "There is more than safety here," the priest continued, refilling her cup with wine that caught the candlelight like liquid amber. "Madame Dubois tells me you carry information that must reach certain friends in London. Such journeys require careful planning, multiple stops, and the cooperation of many good people who share our understanding of Christian duty." She understood that he was offering more than temporary shelter. The church maintained connections to escape routes that could carry her across occupied territory to neutral Switzerland, or perhaps to the Mediterranean coast, where British submarines occasionally retrieved stranded agents. Such networks represented years of careful cultivation, trust built through shared risk and common purpose. "I am grateful for your kindness, Father, but I cannot ask you to risk your congregation for my sake. If the Germans discover what you are doing here, they will discover what God wills them to discover," he replied with serene confidence. "Our Lord instructed us to welcome strangers, feed the hungry, and comfort the afflicted. The uniform of those who oppose such works is irrelevant to our obligations." The communion wine grew warm in her hands as she considered the choice before her. Safety lay in accepting the priest's protection and following established escape routes to neutral territory. But duty demanded that she deliver the photographed intelligence through the fastest possible channels, even if that meant increased personal risk. The heavy rope that hung in the cathedral's bell tower had summoned lines faithful to prayer for over 4 centuries, its thick hemp fibers worn smooth by countless hands pulling the ancient bronze bells. Now it would serve a purpose its makers never intended, carrying a Polish spy toward freedom or death with equal indifference to the outcome. Krystyna gripped the rough cordage with hands made steady by desperation, feeling the weight of history in every strand as she prepared to trust her life to a tool sanctified by generations of devotion. The discovery had come without warning. German boots on cathedral stones, harsh voices demanding entry, despite Father Dubois' protests about the sanctity of holy ground. Colonel Brenner's authority superseded ecclesiastical privilege when matters of Reich security were involved. The search would be thorough, professional, and ultimately successful unless she could escape before the hunters reached the wine cellar where coded messages lay hidden among sacramental bottles. Through the bell tower's Gothic windows, she could see Wehrmacht soldiers surrounding the cathedral with methodical precision. They had learned from their failure at the administrative building, expanding their perimeter to include every possible escape route within a 6-block radius. Sharpshooters occupied elevated positions on adjacent buildings, their rifle scopes glinting in the afternoon sun as they prepared to intercept anyone attempting to flee across Lyon's ancient rooftops. The bell tower offered vertical escape rather than horizontal flight, but reaching the roof required a climb that would test every limit of her physical conditioning. The rope stretched nearly 30 meters from the bell chamber to the cathedral's peak, its path threading between massive stone buttresses and decorative gargoyles that had watched over the city since medieval times. One slip, one moment of weakness, and she would fall to her death on the cobblestones far below. She began the ascent with careful deliberation, wrapping the rope around her waist in the manner taught during mountain training in Scotland. Each movement upward carried her further from the relative safety of the bell chamber and closer to exposure on the cathedral's exterior walls. The hemp fibers bit into her palms, despite her attempts to maintain proper grip, and the physical demands of the climb quickly exhausted muscles already strained by hours of tension and fear. Below her, the sounds of systematic search grew closer. German voices echoed through stone corridors as security teams examined every corner of the cathedral's interior. Father Dubois' protests had become increasingly desperate, his appeals to religious sanctuary falling on ears trained to recognize resistance when they encountered it. The wine cellar would be discovered within minutes, its secrets exposed to men who understood exactly what coded messages hidden among communion bottles represented. Halfway up the rope, her progress was interrupted by the crack of rifle fire from the street below. The shot was not aimed at her, but at someone else attempting to flee the tightening security cordon. The sound echoed off cathedral walls with sharp finality, followed by shouted German orders and the running footsteps of soldiers pursuing other targets. Lyon's resistance network was being systematically dismantled, each arrest leading to further discoveries in an expanding web of capture and interrogation. The rope swayed sickeningly as wind gusts caught her body, threatening to dash her against the cathedral's stone walls with force that would shatter bones like glass. She pressed her face against the hemp fibers, breathing their dusty scent while forcing her exhausted muscles to continue the relentless upward progress. Each meter gained brought her closer to the roof, but also made her more visible to the sharpshooters positioned on surrounding buildings. Through gaps in the Gothic stonework, she glimpsed the German search reaching the wine cellar. Flashlight beams probed among the bottles where Father Dubois kept his carefully concealed intelligence cache. The discovery would come soon, followed by arrest, interrogation, and the systematic destruction of a network that had saved dozens of Allied lives. Her escape had become more than personal survival. It represented the only hope of preserving operational security for an entire resistance cell. The bell rope ended at a stone platform just below the cathedral's main roofline, where medieval builders had installed a maintenance access point for workers tending the ancient structure. From this position, she could see across Lyon's rooftops to the Rhone River, where escape routes might still exist if she could survive long enough to reach them. But the roof itself offered no concealment from the watchful eyes of German marksmen who now knew exactly where to focus their attention. The rope had carried her to freedom's edge, but the final steps would require courage beyond anything mere training could provide. Below, the search teams had found what they were looking for. Above, sharpshooters adjusted their rifle scopes with the patient precision of hunters who had cornered their prey. Between earth and sky, suspended on ancient hemp fibers, sanctified by centuries of prayer, Krystyna prepared for the final gamble that would determine whether this day ended in liberation or death. The ferryman's wooden paddle had guided countless souls across the Rhone River during 40 years of quiet service, its weathered blade cutting through water that reflected the ancient stones of Lyon like a liquid mirror. Pierre Morel worked his small boat with the steady rhythm of a man who understood that rivers care nothing for the politics of those who cross them, carrying Germans and French, collaborators and resistors with equal indifference toward their final destinations. Krystyna reached the riverbank as dusk settled over the city like a grey shroud, her dress torn and bloodied from the desperate flight across rooftops that had carried her beyond the reach of German marksmen. The pursuit continued behind her, searchlights sweeping through streets where Wehrmacht patrols hunted with methodical determination. But the river offered possibilities that urban terrain did not, its dark waters promising concealment for those brave enough to trust their lives to its ancient currents. Morel's boat waited in the shadows beneath Pont Bonaparte, its hull scarred by decades of service, but maintained with the careful attention that rivermen gave to vessels that meant the difference between livelihood and starvation. The ferryman himself appeared to be dozing at his oars, an old man catching whatever rest he could between fares. But his eyes tracked movement along the riverbank with professional awareness, noting details that might prove significant to passengers who paid for more than simple transportation. "The crossing is dangerous tonight," he said without looking directly at her, his voice carrying the measured cadence of someone accustomed to conducting business in whispers. German patrols on both sides, searchlights sweeping the water every few minutes. A person would need compelling reasons to risk such a journey. She approached the boat with the careful steps of someone who had learned to evaluate every potential ally for signs of betrayal or genuine assistance. Rivermen operated in the grey areas between collaboration and resistance, their survival dependent on serving whoever could pay their fees while avoiding entanglement in conflicts that might sink more than wooden boats. "I have compelling reasons," she replied, allowing exhaustion to color her voice with authentic desperation, "and payment for someone willing to help a traveler reach the eastern shore." Morel studied her with eyes that had seen decades of human misery flow past his landing like debris after flooding. Her appearance told stories that needed no elaboration. The torn dress, the cuts on her hands, the way she favored her left leg suggested recent flight from circumstances that most people would consider fatal. "Such passengers often carried the most interesting cargo. Payment in what currency?" he asked, his paddle trailing in the water with movements that appeared casual but positioned the boat for rapid departure. These days, different coins buy different services. She understood the question's implications. French francs might purchase simple transportation across the river. British pounds would indicate intelligence operations that required special handling. But the photographs hidden in her clothing represented currency more valuable than any monetary consideration. Information that could alter the balance of power in ways that transcended individual profit. Information that certain parties would find valuable, she said carefully. Details about German transportation schedules that might interest people who understand such things. The ferryman's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, professional caution replacing casual inquiry. Transportation schedules were the lifeblood of sabotage operations, enabling resistance networks to target supply convoys with precision that maximized damage while minimizing risk to civilian populations. Such intelligence commanded premium prices from buyers who possessed the expertise to utilize it effectively. A searchlight beam swept across the water 50 meters upstream, its harsh glare turning the river's surface into a sheet of molten silver. before moving on to probe other shadows where fugitives might hide. The light's passage was followed by the distant rumble of military vehicles crossing the bridge overhead, their weight making the ancient stones vibrate with mechanical authority. "The current is treacherous near the eastern bank," Morel observed, his paddle now moving with subtle purpose to position the boat within the deepest shadows. "Many people have drowned trying to reach shore without proper guidance. A wise traveler accepts help from those who know the river's moods." She stepped into the boat with movements made clumsy by exhaustion and injury, her weight causing the wooden hull to rock gently in the dark water. The vessel was larger than it had appeared from shore, with hidden compartments beneath the floorboards where contraband could be concealed during inspections by patrol boats. Everything about the craft suggested years of experience in transporting cargo that required discretion. "I am very grateful for your guidance," she said, settling onto the worn wooden bench while Morel began pulling away from shore with strokes that made no sound in the quiet water. "Perhaps we can discuss compensation once we reach safety." The boat moved through shadows like a ghost ship carrying souls between worlds, its passage marked only by the gentle lap of water against wooden planks and the steady rhythm of the ferryman's paddle cutting through liquid. And darkness. The blood-stained handkerchief lay crumpled on the floor of what should have been sanctuary, its white cotton fabric bearing the rusty brown stains that marked the final moments of someone who had trusted the wrong person with their life. Krystyna found it beside the overturned table where Henri Cartier had planned to make contact with British intelligence, the same table where he had spread maps and discussed extraction. Routes with the careful precision of an experienced operative who understood that mistakes in their profession were measured in body counts rather than embarrassment. The safe house on Rue de la Charité had been compromised with surgical efficiency. Furniture remained in place, personal belongings undisturbed, but every document had been removed and every communication device destroyed with the methodical thoroughness that characterized German intelligence operations. The walls still held family photographs and religious icons that suggested normal domestic life, but the absence of resistance materials spoke louder than any physical evidence of betrayal. Henri had been her contact for the final stage of the mission, a veteran of the Great War who had joined the resistance when German tanks rolled through his hometown in 1940. His network had successfully extracted 17 Allied agents over the past 2 years, moving them through carefully established routes that led from Lyon to neutral Switzerland. The operation had functioned with clockwork precision until someone decided that German gold outweighed French honor. She knelt beside the handkerchief, recognizing the embroidered initials that marked it as Henri's personal possession. The fabric was still damp, suggesting that his capture had occurred within the past few hours. German efficiency extended to the timing of their operations, allowing targets to feel secure before striking with overwhelming force. The blood spoke of resistance, perhaps a final attempt to destroy critical information before interrogation could extract it. Through less pleasant methods, the apartment's silence held the particular quality that follows violent disruption of ordinary life. Photographs showed Henri with his wife and children, all evacuated to relatives in the unoccupied zone, when his resistance activities became too dangerous for family proximity. Now those smiling faces seemed to mock the futility of precautions that could not account for human greed and fear working in combination to destroy carefully constructed networks. Through the window, she could see Wehrmacht patrols moving through the neighborhood with casual authority, their presence no longer hunting but consolidating control over territory they now considered secured. The systematic nature of their deployment suggested that Henri's capture had provided information about resistance activities throughout this district. The entire network was being rolled up with German efficiency, each arrest leading to further discoveries in an expanding web of betrayal. On the kitchen counter lay Henri's coffee cup, still half full and cold to the touch. Beside it sat a piece of bread with jam, interrupted mid-meal when death came calling in the form of polite knocks, followed by harsh voices demanding immediate compliance. The mundane details of a life cut short carried more emotional weight than any dramatic scene of violence might have provided. The handkerchief itself told a story that needed no elaboration. Henri had attempted to destroy something, probably the coded communications that linked his cell to broader resistance operations. The blood suggested that German patience had its limits when cooperation was not immediately forthcoming. But the thoroughness of the search indicated that they had eventually extracted whatever information they required. Hidden beneath the kitchen sink, behind cleaning supplies that Germans had not bothered to examine thoroughly, she found Henri's emergency cash. A small leather pouch contained British pounds, Swiss francs, and forged identity documents for multiple escape scenarios. The money was untouched, the papers perfectly crafted, but their presence confirmed that Henri had not betrayed the network voluntarily. Someone else had provided the intelligence that led German forces to this address. The betrayal carried implications beyond Henri's death and her own immediate danger. The extraction route to Switzerland was compromised, along with the contacts who would have facilitated her journey to neutral territory. The British submarine that was scheduled to retrieve intelligence from the Mediterranean coast would wait in vain for agents who would never arrive. The carefully photographed German transportati on schedules represented strategic intelligence that could alter the course of battles, but only if she could survive long enough to deliver them through alternative channels. Outside, the sound of approaching vehicles indicated that German security was returning to conduct additional searches of the compromised safe house. They would be looking for evidence of other agents, additional network connections, anything that might lead to further arrests. The net was tightening with methodical precision, each discovery leading to broader understanding of resistance operations throughout Lyon. The handkerchief seemed to grow heavier in her hands as she understood its significance. Henri's blood had purchased her life through the warning it provided, but at the cost of destroying the network that was supposed to carry her to safety. She was alone now in enemy territory, carrying intelligence that could change the war, but lacking any clear path to deliver it to the people who could use it effectively. The dead man's sacrifice demanded that she find a way to honor it, even if that meant abandoning every plan and improvising survival from moment to moment. The train conductor's brass whistle gleamed in the pre-dawn darkness like a small golden star, its polished surface reflecting the scattered lights of Lyons railway yard, where freight cars waited in long lines to carry German supplies toward the Italian front. Marcel Tessier had blown that whistle for 37 years, summoning passengers to board trains that connected France to the wider world. But tonight it would signal something far more dangerous than routine departure announcements. Krystyna crouched behind a stack of wooden crates near the marshalling yard, watching German guards patrol between the locomotive sheds, with rifles slung across their shoulders and cigarettes glowing like fireflies in the humid air. The freight train bound for Marseille was her last hope of escape, its cargo holds offering concealment for the final leg of a journey that had already cost too many lives. The photographs hidden in her clothing represented intelligence that could save Allied lives, but only if she could survive the next few minutes without discovery. Tessier moved through his pre-departure routine with the practiced efficiency of a man who had learned to find safety in predictable patterns. His uniform was pressed despite the early hour, his cap positioned at the regulation angle that satisfied German inspectors who occasionally verified that French railway personnel maintained proper standards. But his eyes held the quiet intensity of someone whose loyalty lay with networks that existed beyond official recognition. The whistle's significance extended far beyond its primary function as a signaling device. Hidden within its brass construction was a miniature radio transmitter that could broadcast coded messages to resistance operators throughout the region. French railway workers had developed communication systems that operated beneath German notice, using maintenance schedules and departure announcements to coordinate activities that would have resulted in immediate execution if detected by security forces. "All aboard for Marseille," Tessier called in a voice that carried across the railway yard with professional authority. "Departure in 10 minutes for all stations south." The announcement sounded routine to anyone listening casually, but trained ears would recognize specific phrases that indicated special circumstances. All stations south meant that resistance operatives should prepare for emergency extraction procedures. 10 minutes corresponded to predetermined timing for coordinated activities along the entire route to the Mediterranean coast. Krystyna moved through shadows between the freight cars, timing her approach to coincide with the guards' patrol patterns. German security was efficient but predictable, following schedules that could be observed and exploited by someone with sufficient patience and training. The key was to remain invisible during the brief intervals when surveillance coverage left gaps large enough for human passage. A cargo car marked with Red Cross symbols offered the most promising concealment, its medical supplies providing cover for unauthorized passengers, while its humanitarian designation made German soldiers reluctant to conduct thorough searches. International law protected medical shipments from military interference, though such protections carried weight only when convenient for occupying forces. The car's interior was packed with crates containing surgical instruments, morphine, and other medical supplies desperately needed by German field hospitals treating casualties from the Italian campaign. The irony was bitter but useful. Her escape would be facilitated by materials intended to heal. Soldiers who were fighting to prevent exactly the kind of intelligence she carried from reaching Allied commands. Tessier appeared at the freight car's open door with movements that suggested routine inspection rather than clandestine assistance. His examination of the cargo manifest provided cover for conversation that would appear completely innocent to any observer while conveying information essential for survival. Medical supplies for the field hospitals near Toulon, he said in the tone of someone reading official documentation. Very important cargo, highest priority for safe delivery. The German Medical Corps has specifically requested that these materials reach their destination without delay or interference. She understood the message's multiple layers. Toulon was a major port where British submarines occasionally conducted covert operations. Medical priority meant that the train would receive minimal inspection during its journey. German Medical Corps indicated that her presence would be protected by the same regulations that safeguarded humanitarian supplies. "I understand." "Oh, completely," she replied, while climbing into the cargo car with movements that suggested authorized access rather than desperate concealment. Such important work must be handled with appropriate care. The whistle's blast echoed across the railway yard as the locomotive built steam pressure for departure. Other workers shouted final warnings and completed last-minute preparations, while German guards maintained their patrols with automatic precision. The train began moving with the gradual acceleration that marked heavy freight loads, its wheels finding rhythm on steel rails that led away from Lyon toward destinations where different rules might apply. Tessier closed the cargo car door from outside, his whistle falling silent after issuing the signals that would coordinate her journey through resistance networks that operated along the entire route to the coast. The brass instrument had served its purpose, transforming routine railway announcements into coded communications that might yet deliver critical intelligence to the people who could use it to save lives and win battles. The sealed envelope containing tomorrow's mission orders lay on the desk of the British safe house in Marseille, its wax seal bearing the insignia of the Special Operations Executive and the weight of another deadly assignment. Krystyna stared at it through eyes that had seen too much in the space of a single day, knowing that opening it would commit her to fresh dangers before she had fully processed the trauma of surviving the previous 24 hours. Commander James. Whitfield poured tea with the ceremonial precision that marked his service in His Majesty's Navy, adding sugar with careful attention to proportions that spoke of civilization maintained despite barbaric circumstances. His uniform was immaculate despite the early hour, his bearing suggesting someone who had learned to find stability in routine when everything else existed in constant flux. The photographs you obtained are already being analyzed by intelligence specialists in London, he said, settling into his chair with movements that accommodated old wounds from the Great War. Preliminary assessment suggests that German transportation schedules will be significantly disrupted within the week. Lives will be saved because of your work yesterday. She nodded with acknowledgement that carried no satisfaction, understanding that success in espionage was measured in statistics that never captured the human cost of individual operations. Henri Cartier remained dead. Father Dubois faced interrogation that might result in execution. Fräulein Weber would live with the knowledge that her kindness had been exploited by someone whose entire identity had been fabricated for strategic purposes. The tea was excellent. Ceylon blend that spoke of supply chains reaching across an empire where the sun never set on British influence. Such luxuries seemed impossibly distant from the world of forged papers and blood-stained handkerchiefs where she had spent the previous day. The contrast was jarring, as if she had stepped between parallel universes where different rules governed human behavior. Through the safe-house windows, she could see Marseille awakening to another day of occupation. German soldiers maintained their patrols with mechanical regularity, while French civilians hurried through streets where survival depended on avoiding attention from anyone wearing a uniform. The rhythm was familiar now, the dance of oppression and resistance that played out in every occupied city across Europe. The mission parameters for tomorrow are somewhat different, Whitfield continued, his tone suggesting complications that would require careful explanation. Italian partisans have requested specific assistance with disrupting German communications networks near the Austrian border. The work would be similar to your specialization, but the territory is considerably more dangerous. The sealed envelope seemed to grow, heavier as she contemplated its contents. Another day, another identity, another performance that might end in death or capture. The cycle was relentless, driven by strategic necessities that cared nothing for individual exhaustion or psychological limits. The war would continue until one side achieved complete victory, regardless of personal costs paid by the people who fought its shadow battles. She thought of her mother's rosary, lost somewhere in Lyon's labyrinthine passages during her desperate escape from German hunters. The beads had carried prayers across generations, connecting her to family traditions that predated this conflict by centuries. Now those connections were severed, like so many others sacrificed to the demands of a war that consumed everything it touched. How many more missions like yesterday will be necessary? She asked, knowing the question was futile but needing to voice it nonetheless. Whitfield's expression softened with something approaching paternal compassion. Until we win, my dear. Until we drive every German soldier back across the Rhine and restore some semblance of civilized order to this continent. Each successful operation brings that goal incrementally closer. The mathematics were brutal but undeniable. Strategic intelligence gathered at enormous personal risk would save Allied lives and shorten the war by days or weeks. Transportation schedules disrupted by sabotage operations would prevent German reinforcements from reaching critical battles. The accumulated effect of countless individual sacrifices would eventually tip the balance toward liberation. But liberation for whom? Henri Cartier would never see his family again. Father Dubois might not survive German interrogation. The resistance networks that had sheltered her would be systematically dismantled, their members facing execution or deportation to concentration camps where survival was measured in months rather than years. She reached for the envelope with hands that trembled slightly despite her efforts at control. The wax seal cracked easily beneath her thumb, revealing typed orders that would send her into fresh danger before the sun set on another day. The cycle would continue until the war ended or until she joined the growing list of agents whose service was commemorated, only in classified files that would remain sealed for decades. Tomorrow would bring new identities, new dangers, and new opportunities to gather intelligence that might save lives or alter battles. The game would continue, with its deadly stakes and uncertain outcomes, until one side achieved final victory. Another basic day in the life of a spy.